For Menzies.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I note to the House and those who are viewing or listening tonight that this is National Stroke Week. Every 9 minutes, someone in Australia will suffer a stroke. That means in the course of this adjournment debate, which has gone for almost half an hour, 3 Australians, if not close to 4, have suffered a stroke. And by 2050, without further action, this number will increase to 1 stroke in every 4 minutes. In this year, 2017 alone, Australians will suffer more than 56,000 strokes. Many of these will be experienced by people living in regional Australia. In fact, regional Australians are 19% more likely to suffer a stroke than those living in metropolitan areas. Advancements in stroke treatment and care mean that a stroke is no longer a death sentence for many. However, for more than 470,000 stroke survivors and their families living in our community, the impacts are far-reaching. Patient outcomes from stroke vary widely depending on where you live and the access to a stroke unit. And you, if I can say so personally, Mr Speaker, and myself have a former colleague in the previous member for Flinders, Peter Reith, who suffered a stroke and is struggling with the outcome of that. He's just one of the former members of this place who have suffered this insidious condition and is now, and he and his family, living with the outcome of it. Just today or this week, the Stroke Foundation published a new document. If you'll allow me to breach standing orders for just a moment and show it, Mr Speaker, the document No Postcode Untouched, Stroke in Australia in 2017 demonstrates the impact of stroke on millions of lives in suburbs like ours and indeed in cities and villages right across the nation and into the future. It highlights the increasing burden of stroke, particularly in regional and rural Australia, and the challenge to our health system there is very significant. I say this because even though I now represent a suburban electorate, as you do, sir, I grew up in rural regional Australia, and what this document shows is that the incidence of stroke, and therefore I suspect the ability of people in those areas to be able to avail themselves of appropriate medical treatment, care and preventive measures may well be different to those who live in the major urban areas of Australia. This latest report provides analysis of stroke statistics and estimations by federal electorate on the incidence of stroke, the number of stroke survivors living in the community and the leading risk factors for preventable stroke. Risk factors include high blood pressure, high cholesterol, atrial fibrillation, that's an irregular heartbeat, and physical inactivity. And using population health and research data, the Stroke Foundation also estimated the number of new strokes in Australia over the next 30 years. And I was interested in delving into the document because, you know, I live in I represent a middle-class urban electorate in Melbourne that, of the risk factors, 2 of which are high cholesterol levels and the other is electorates for physical inactivity, on the top 15 electorates on these tables, for 5 or 6 out of the risk factors, my electorate came up in the top 15. For example, for high cholesterol, at number 14 out of 15 of 150 electorates in Australia is Menzies. High cholesterol levels for constituents in my electorate, 39,598,000 people in my electorate, which represents 27.3% of the electorate, which is a very high number of people. And then for the top electorates in terms of physical activity, and I pride myself on physical activity, Mr Speaker, but obviously my constituents don't always follow my example, 12 out of the top 15 electorates in this regard. In Victoria, number of people physically inactive in Menzies, 68,827, which represents 47 0.4% of the electorate. All I can say to my constituents is I encourage you to get out and walk, run, cycle, swim, whatever, and check your cholesterol.